Hi, I'm Don Frazier, and this continues the series on the Civil War in Louisiana and Texas. So, when the Federals couldn't take Vicksburg, and they tried for most of the summer to somehow convince Vicksburg to either surrender, or General Williams tried to dig around Vicksburg by opening a new pathway for the Mississippi across DeSoto Point. That doesn't work. When they'd fallen back to Baton Rouge, they had really lost the strategic initiative. And now the Confederates held it. General Earl Van Dorn at Vicksburg says, all right, now it's time to follow this up by an attack of our own. Let's launch an offensive. Let's retake Baton Rouge. If we can retake Baton Rouge, then we can threaten New Orleans. Well, retaking Baton Rouge from the land side seems like a fairly easy deal. The Confederates had the manpower, and the Federals were a little thin on the number of troops they had on the lower Mississippi. But the problem is the Federals had a ton of warships, number of gunboats, number of capital ships. Those big black cannon on the Mississippi were going to be tough to overcome. But Van Dorn figured he had a secret weapon. That is the CSS Arkansas, an ironclad. And ironclads had shown themselves to be far superior to any wooden vessels, the majority of which composed the Federal fleet. So this one Confederate ironclad should be able to cut through that Union fleet like a hot knife through butter, with one exception. In all of the scuffles around Vicksburg, a Union ironclad from the upper Mississippi fleet, the USS Essex, had floated past Vicksburg and now was with Farragut's fleet opposite Baton Rouge. So the Arkansas had a rival ironclad on station. Well, Van Dorn says the risk is worth the gamble. I mean, the gamble is worth the reward, rather. And so we'll send a land column under John C. Breckinridge, and they'll attack Baton Rouge from the east, and then the CSS Arkansas will come down the Mississippi and essentially drive off the Union warships. It's going to be a great combined arms operation. One problem: Breckinridge is very handy at getting out on time, goes down to Camp Moore in Tangipahoa Parish, where he meets another Confederate force under General Ruggles. That land component works great. Everything is working like clockwork. They leave on July 27th. They get there in early August. Everything looks good. The CSS Arkansas, however, is bulky at best. Its engines are wheezy, and they're prone to breaking down. So when the Arkansas leaves Vicksburg, it keeps breaking down. Now, the date of the attack is supposed to be August 5th. Breckinridge from the east, Arkansas from the river, and the Federals crunched in between. On August 4th, the Federals in Baton Rouge were pretty clear that an attack was coming. General Williams knew that, clearly that buildup over in Tangipahoa Parish is meant for us, and there was lots of reports of the Arkansas coming, but nobody could quite figure out where exactly it was because it kept breaking down. And so they would expect it to come around the river bend and never show up. So then you have to ask yourself, well, has it already passed me and I missed it? Or is it not here yet? Is it somehow found a bypass? The Arkansas is mysterious. But Williams says, all right, let's deploy a mile east of Baton Rouge, take up a defensive position, so when the Confederates get here, we'll know all about it and be prepared for the fight. Daybreak, August 5th, about 2,500 Confederates attack a like number of Federals. The fighting rolls the Federals back. They make a stand, especially around the Magnolia Cemetery, where the fighting is so brutal and so give and take that the question really hangs in the balance. General Williams is killed. He's just dropped like a clubbed ox, and that causes kind of a shiver to the Union line, so they start to give way. The Confederates, disorganized from their success, try to follow on, but they follow on fairly piecemeal, and these clumps of Confederates that are now heading into the streets of Baton Rouge are starting to come under fire from the Federal ships on the Mississippi. The Confederates are asking themselves, where is the Arkansas? If the Arkansas was doing its job, we wouldn't be taking these big rounds from the river. And so they start to lose heart in turn. Finally, the Confederates think that something must be amiss on the river. They're correct. And they decide that they cannot face the Union Navy without some sort of support. They give up the fight and they fall back. They left behind about 500 men killed, wounded, and missing. They'd killed about 400 Federals in the process of this fight. So a fairly sharp and bloody engagement on August 5th. But Baton Rouge is still in Federal hands, if a little combat scarred, a little battle scarred. The next morning, CSS Arkansas shows up, arrives too late to have any bearing on the fight, and its engines are clearly not going to sustain it through a one-on-one combat with USS Essex. And in fact, as soon as those ships begin to swap rounds, the engines on the Arkansas both give out simultaneously. Pang, pang, and now it's all of a sudden adrift on the very swift current of the Mississippi. Its crew manages to beach the Arkansas opposite Baton Rouge on the west bank. They get off the boat, they burn the boat, and they head off into the canebrake to get away from potential capture. The Arkansas burns down, its guns discharge, it blows up, and it's destroyed. So the Battle of Baton Rouge does not achieve the strategic aims that Van Dorn had hoped for. Breckinridge falls back and says, well, if I can't take the city, I can do something that we should have done a long time ago, and that's occupy the bluffs of Port Hudson. So about a week after the battle, his army's now relocated to those bluffs, and they begin the spade work of creating a fortification, a southern downriver counterpart to Vicksburg upriver. Between Vicksburg and Port Hudson will be the mouth of the Red River. The mouth of the Red River is a great water artery heading into the heartland of western Louisiana and also all the way to northeastern Texas. If you can keep that gap open, if you can deny that stretch of the Mississippi to the Federals, then the Mississippi and the Trans-Mississippi remain relevant to the Confederate cause. Almost immediately, though, Confederate grand strategy required Breckinridge to abandon his task. He's drawn off to the Kentucky campaign, which will take place that fall, and leaves Ruggles behind with only about 1,500 troops to continue the work. Well, the Federals are going, gosh, if they get that fortification built, we're going to have a lot of trouble. So they send the Essex on up to take a look to see what's going on. Essex goes up, another steamer, the Anglo-American, goes up, and on August 29th, these vessels fire the first shots, had the first exchange of gunfire between the United States Navy and the Confederate position at Port Hudson. About a week later, September 7th, Essex tries again and comes back around, goes back to Baton Rouge and says, guess what? We waited too long. The Confederates are now on the Mississippi at Port Hudson and Vicksburg. We waited too long, and now we have doubled the size of our chore.